Kira Washington stared at the official envelope in her hand, turning it over with a growing sense of confusion. The county court seal stared back at her, and she knew whatever was inside wasn't going to be good news. She tore it open, pulling out the crisp paper inside and scanning the words that made absolutely no sense to her. A traffic violation? From last month? She muttered, shaking her head as she read further. This has to be a mistake. The citation claimed she had run a red light at the corner of Maple and 5th on August 12th at 2:15 p.m. The fine wasn't huge, $175, but that wasn't the point. Kira knew with absolute certainty she hadn't been anywhere near that intersection on that date. She walked over to her kitchen calendar and flipped back to August, her finger landing on the 12th. Just as she thought, she'd been working that day. Not just working, but on an important assignment that had her nowhere near the location listed on the ticket. Kira dropped her bag on the couch and kicked off her shoes, still holding the citation. After 8 years with the United States Secret Service, she was used to solving problems and dealing with complicated situations, but this was irritating in a different way. Someone had made a mistake, and now she had to waste her time fixing it. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up her work schedule from last month. There it was in black and white. She had been on protective detail that entire week, including August 12th. She had been part of a team providing security for a foreign dignitary visiting from overseas. This is ridiculous, she said to herself, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. Her apartment felt especially quiet tonight. After a week of constant movement, strategic positioning, and heightened awareness, the stillness of her own space sometimes felt strange. Most people didn't understand what her job really involved. The long hours, the constant vigilance, the weight of responsibility. Kira got up and poured herself a glass of water, looking out her kitchen window at the city lights. She'd have to appear in court to contest this ticket. The date on the summons was for next Monday, which meant she'd have to rearrange her schedule. Her boss wouldn't be happy, but there wasn't much choice. She couldn't just pay a fine for something she didn't do. That wasn't who she was. She picked up her phone and called her friend Diane, who answered on the third ring. "Hey, you're back. How was the assignment?" Diane asked. "Same as always. Exhausting, but went off without a hitch," Kira replied, sitting back down on her couch. "But now I've got this weird situation. I just got home and found a traffic ticket in my mail for running a red light on a day I was definitely working. That's strange. Maybe someone got your plate number wrong?" "Maybe. But now I have to go to court next Monday to deal with it. Such a waste of time." Diane laughed sympathetically. "That's bureaucracy for you. Want me to come with you? I'm off on Monday." Kira smiled, grateful for the offer. "No, it should be pretty straightforward. I'll just show them my work records proving I was elsewhere, and that should be that." After they hung up, Kira went to her bedroom and opened her closet, considering what she should wear to court. Her work usually had her in either a dark suit or tactical gear, depending on the assignment. Neither seemed appropriate for traffic court. She finally settled on a navy blazer and black pants, professional but not intimidating. The rest of her evening passed quietly. She made herself a simple dinner, caught up on some TV shows she'd missed while away on assignment, and tried not to think about the court appearance. But something about the situation kept nagging at her. The next morning, Kira went into the K office early. She needed to speak with her supervisor, Agent Reynolds, about taking a few hours off for court on Monday. She found him already at his desk reviewing reports from the previous week's assignment. "Morning, Washington," he said without looking up. "Good work last week. The ambassador's staff sent a formal thank you." "Thank you, sir," Kira replied, standing in front of his desk. "I need to request a few hours of personal time on Monday morning." Now Reynolds looked up, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Problem?" Kira explained about the traffic citation, showing him the paperwork. He frowned as he looked it over. "This is clearly a mistake," he said, handing it back to her. "You were with the protection detail all day on the 12th. We were at the downtown conference center, nowhere near this intersection." "Yes, sir. That's why I need to appear in court to straighten it out." Reynolds nodded. "Of course, take whatever time you need. Do you want official documentation of your whereabouts that day?" That would be helpful, sir. Thank you. I'll have it ready for you by end of day. And Washington, he added as she turned to leave, let me know if there are any issues. If necessary, we can escalate this. Kira nodded, appreciating the support, but hoping it wouldn't come to that. She spent the rest of the day catching up on paperwork and planning for her next assignment, a relatively simple protection detail for a visiting senator the following week. By Friday afternoon, she had the official letter from the Secret Service, confirming her assignment on August 12th. She also pulled her own phone record showing her location data for that day, which clearly placed her at the conference center, not at the intersection where the violation supposedly occurred. The weekend passed quickly. Kira tried to relax, knowing the coming week would be busy with the new assignment after she dealt with this court business. She went for a long run on Sunday, cleaned her apartment, and prepared her clothes and documents for court. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Kira dressed carefully in her chosen outfit, gathered her documents, and drove to the county courthouse. The rain had picked up by the time she arrived, forcing her to make a quick dash from her car to the building entrance. The courthouse was busier than she expected for a Monday morning. People stood in lines waiting to pass through security. Kira joined them, automatically observing everything around her: exits, security personnel positions, people's behaviors, a habit from years of protective work. When she reached the front of the line, she placed her bag on the scanner belt and walked through the metal detector. The security guard gave her a nod of acknowledgement, and she continued on to find the correct courtroom. Following the signs, she made her way to courtroom 3B on the third floor. Outside the door, a posting listed the day's cases, and she quickly found her name on the schedule. With 20 minutes before her case would be called, she found a seat in the back row and settled in to wait. The courtroom slowly filled with people. Other traffic violators, a few lawyers in suits, court staff moving efficiently between the gallery and the judge's chambers. Kira observed it all with a detached interest, mentally rehearsing what she would say when her case was called. She reviewed her documents one more time. The official letter from the Secret Service, her phone location records, her work schedule. It seemed excessive for a simple traffic ticket, but something told her to be thorough. Years of training had taught her to always be prepared, to anticipate problems before they arose. At precisely 9:30 a.m., a side door opened, and a court officer entered. "All rise," he called out. The Honorable Judge Harold Blackwood presiding. Everyone in the courtroom stood as the judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and a stern expression. He sat down at the bench and nodded, and everyone returned to their seats. "Be seated," he said, his voice filling the room without seeming to raise it. "We have a full docket today, so let's proceed efficiently." As the first few cases were called, Kira watched the judge carefully. He was brisk and no-nonsense, cutting off long-winded explanations and issuing quick judgments. Some people left looking relieved, others frustrated or angry. She began to feel a slight unease. This judge didn't seem particularly interested in hearing detailed explanations. An hour passed, and Kira remained patient, watching and waiting. Finally, the court officer called out, "Case number 2023 TR4587, County v. Washington, Kira. Charge: failure to stop at a traffic signal." Kira stood gathering her documents and walked confidently to the front of the courtroom. As she approached the bench, she caught the judge's eye, expecting the usual neutral assessment. Instead, she saw something flicker across his face, something that made her instincts sharpen instantly. It was subtle, just a brief change in his expression as he looked at her, but Kira had been trained to notice such details. And what she saw made her mentally prepare for a very different encounter than she had anticipated. She stood before the bench, documents in hand, ready to present her case, unaware of exactly how this seemingly routine court appearance was about to unfold. The county courthouse was an imposing building of gray stone and tall windows. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Courtroom 3B, where Kira now stood, was wood-paneled with high ceilings and rows of benches that reminded her of church pews. Morning light filtered through the windows, casting Long rectangles of sunshine across the worn carpet. State your name for the record, the court clerk said, not looking up from her computer. Kira Washington, she replied, her voice clear and steady. Judge Blackwood glanced down at the papers before him, then back at Kira. Something in his gaze made her stand a little straighter. Ms. Washington, you're here for running a red light at Maple and 5th on August 12th. How do you plead? His tone was clipped, impatient even though the day had barely begun. Not guilty, Your Honor. I wasn't at that location on the date in question. The judge raised an eyebrow. The officer's report says otherwise. Are you suggesting the officer made a mistake? Yes, Your Honor. I have documentation, proving I was elsewhere at the time of the alleged violation. Judge Blackwood leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked under his weight. Let's hear it then. Though I must say, in my experience, most people who claim they weren't there usually were. Kira felt a slight tightening in her chest but kept her expression neutral. She had faced much more intimidating situations in her career. A dismissive traffic court judge wasn't going to rattle her. Your Honor, on August 12th at 2:15 p.m. when this violation supposedly occurred, I was on duty. I work for the United States Secret Service, and I was assigned to a protection detail that entire week. She began to reach into her folder for the documentation, but the judge waved his hand dismissively. The Secret Service? His tone was skeptical. And I suppose you were protecting the president that day? A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Kira didn't smile. No, Your Honor. I was part of a team providing security for a visiting foreign dignitary. The assignment had me at the downtown conference center, approximately 7 miles from the intersection in question. She tried again to present her documentation, but Judge Blackwood continued without acknowledging her effort. Ms. Washington, do you know how many creative excuses I hear in this courtroom every day? People claiming they weren't driving, their car was stolen, they were at work, they were in the hospital. He shook his head. The officer clearly recorded your license plate. The photo evidence shows a vehicle registered in your name. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'd like to see that photo evidence. And I have official documentation confirming my whereabouts that day. The judge sighed heavily as if her persistence was testing his patience. Very well, Officer Parker, are you present? A police officer in the front row stood up. He was middle-aged with a trim mustache and the solid build of someone who spent time at the gym. Yes, Your Honor. Please present the evidence for Ms. Washington's violation. Officer Parker approached the bench with a folder, which he handed to the judge. Judge Blackwood opened it and examined the contents, nodding to himself. The evidence seems clear to me, Ms. Washington. A car with your license plate ran the red light at 2:17 p.m. on August 12th. May I see the photo, Your Honor? Kira requested. With obvious reluctance, the judge handed the folder to the court clerk, who passed it to Kira. She examined the photo carefully. It showed a black sedan similar to hers, but the license plate was only partially visible. The last 3 characters matched her plate, but the first part was blurry. Your Honor, this image doesn't clearly show my full license plate. Only the last 3 characters are legible, and those could match many vehicles. Additionally, while this car is similar to mine, I can't confirm it is actually my vehicle without seeing the full plate. She returned the folder to the clerk. Judge, Blackwood took it back, glancing at the photo again with narrowed eyes. Officer Parker, can you confirm the full license plate number was visible at the time you recorded this violation? The officer stepped forward again. Yes, Your Honor. I recorded the full plate number in my report. The camera angle sometimes doesn't capture the entire plate clearly, but I had a clear visual at the time. Judge Blackwood nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. He turned back to Kira. Ms. Washington, the officer, has confirmed the vehicle was yours. Unless you're suggesting someone else was driving your car that day? No, Your Honor. I'm stating that was not my car at all. My vehicle was parked in the secure lot at my workplace during the time in question. I have documentation to prove my location and duties that day. For the 3rd time, Kira tried to present her folder of evidence. This time, Judge Blackwood reluctantly gestured for her to approach the bench. She handed the folder to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. He flipped through the pages quickly, his expression unchanging. Kira knew what he was seeing. The official letter on Secret Service letterhead confirming her assignment, her work schedule, and her phone location data. For that day, as he read, the courtroom remained quiet. Other waiting defendants watched with interest. This was probably more entertaining than most traffic cases. After what seemed like a long time, but was probably less than a minute, Judge Blackwood closed the folder. He looked at Kira, his gaze harder now. Ms. Washington, this letter states you work for the Secret Service, but it could be fabricated. Anyone with a computer can create an official-looking document these days. Kira felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice level. Your Honor, if you'd like to verify the letter's authenticity, you can contact my supervisor, Agent Reynolds. His contact information is included in the documentation. The judge's mouth tightened. That won't be necessary. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you do work for the Secret Service. That doesn't mean you couldn't have lent your car to someone else that day. My car was in the secure parking facility at headquarters, Your Honor. It couldn't have been at that intersection. Do you have proof of that? Security camera footage, perhaps? A parking receipt? Kira hesitated. She didn't have those specific items. She hadn't thought she'd need to prove where her car was, only where she was. I don't have that documentation with me, Your Honor, but I could obtain it if needed. Judge Blackwood made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Convenient. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. Ms. Washington, let me be frank. I've been doing this job for 27 years. I've heard every excuse imaginable. Some people come in here claiming to be doctors, lawyers, even FBI agents, all to avoid a simple traffic fine. His gaze swept over her, assessing. You seem like an intelligent young woman, but intelligence doesn't put you above the law. The evidence shows your vehicle ran that red light. The fine is $175. Pay it, be more careful in the future, and we can all move on with our day. Kira felt something shift inside her. She had approached this situation as a simple misunderstanding, expecting that presenting the facts would resolve it quickly. But Judge Blackwood wasn't interested in the facts. He had already decided she was guilty. Your Honor, with all due respect, I am not paying a fine for a violation I did not commit. The photo evidence is inconclusive, and my documentation clearly shows I was elsewhere at the time. I request that this case be dismissed. The judge's expression darkened. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats, sensing the tension. Ms. Washington, are you refusing to accept the court's judgment? I'm requesting that the court consider all the evidence, Your Honor, including the evidence I've provided, proving my whereabouts. Judge Blackwood stared at her for a long moment. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Your documentation proves nothing except that you can create convincing paperwork. The officer's evidence clearly shows your vehicle at the scene. Unless you can prove someone else was driving your car, which you've already stated wasn't the case, then you are responsible for the violation. He picked up his gavel. The court finds you guilty. The fine is $175, due within 30 days. Kira stood very still, her mind racing. This wasn't just about the money. It was about principle. She knew she wasn't at that intersection. She knew her car wasn't there either, and now a judge was ignoring evidence and calling her a liar. Your Honor, I respectfully request to speak with the district attorney's office about this matter. I believe there's been a serious misidentification, and I'm prepared to take this further if necessary. Several heads turned in the gallery. Few people challenged Judge Blackwood this directly. The judge's face flushed slightly. Ms. Washington, are you threatening to waste more of the court's time over a simple traffic ticket? I'm exercising my right to contest what I believe is an incorrect citation, Your Honor. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken. Judge Blackwood's knuckles whitened around his gavel. Let me make something very clear, he said, his voice low, but intense. This court has procedures. If you wish to appeal, you'll need to file the appropriate paperwork and pay the associated fees. But I strongly advise against it. The evidence is clear, and further action would only result in additional costs to you. He leaned forward slightly. Sometimes, Ms. Washington, it's better to accept when you're in the wrong. Not everyone can admit their mistakes. It takes a certain level of maturity. Something in his tone, in the way his eyes narrowed as he looked at her, made Kira suddenly understand. This wasn't just about a traffic ticket anymore. There was something else happening here. Something she recognized from previous encounters in her life. She took a deep breath, centering herself. In her years with the Secret Service, she had learned to read people, to sense underlying currents in a room. And right now, every instinct told her that Judge Blackwood had made assumptions about her from the moment she walked into his courtroom. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "I understand the court's procedures, and I respect your position. But I cannot in good conscience pay a fine for something I didn't do." Judge Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Ms. Washington, my patience is wearing thin. You have two options: pay the fine or file an appeal. Either way, we're done here today." He raised his gavel, clearly ready to move on to the next case. Kira made a quick decision. She had one more card to play, one she hadn't wanted to use but now seemed necessary. "Your Honor, before you close this case, there's something else you should know." The judge paused, the gavel still raised. "Unless it's that you're ready to accept the court's decision, I'm not interested." "It's relevant to my defense, Your Honor." Judge Blackwood sighed dramatically. "Make it quick, Ms. Washington. There are many other cases waiting." Kira nodded, her hand moving toward the inside pocket of her blazer. As she did, she noticed Officer Parker shifting his position slightly, his attention suddenly more focused. It was the subtle reaction of someone trained to watch for unexpected movements. She recognized it because she had the same training. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my situation, and I think this might help clarify things." Her fingers closed around what she carried in her pocket, something she didn't usually bring to civilian appointments but had decided to bring today just in case. It was a decision that was about to change everything about this encounter. Judge Harold Blackwood had seen thousands of people stand before his bench over the years. Some were nervous, some defiant, some clearly guilty, and others clearly innocent. He prided himself on being able to read people quickly, a skill he considered essential for an efficient courtroom. When Kira Washington had walked in, he'd made his assessment immediately. Well-dressed, but with an attitude of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The kind of person who thought rules were for other people. He'd seen it countless times before. "Your Honor," Kira began again, "I'd like to address the court's concerns about the authenticity of my documentation." The judge waved his hand dismissively. "Ms. Washington, I've made my ruling. Unless you have something truly substantial to add, we're moving on." "I believe this qualifies as substantial, Your Honor." Something in her tone made several people in the gallery lean forward slightly. Even Officer Parker seemed more alert now, his casual stance shifting to something more attentive. "I understand your skepticism about my employment," Kira continued, her voice steady. "That's why I brought additional verification." Judge Blackwood sighed heavily. "More paperwork isn't going to change my mind, Ms. Washington." "This isn't paperwork, Your Honor." She reached slowly into her jacket, maintaining eye contact with the judge. From an inner pocket, she withdrew a leather wallet-like case. Without opening it, she held it in her hand for a moment. "Your Honor, I didn't want to make a show of this. I was hoping the letter from my supervisor would be sufficient. But since you've questioned the authenticity of my employment, I feel I have no choice but to provide more concrete evidence." The judge's eyes narrowed, fixed on the object in her hand. "What exactly are you showing us, Ms. Washington?" With deliberate movements, Kira opened the case, revealing a gleaming metal badge and identification card. She held it up, not just for the judge to see, but positioned so that Officer Parker could also view it clearly. "This is my United States Secret Service badge and credentials, Your Honor. As I stated earlier, I am an agent with the Secret Service, and on August 12th, I was on protective detail assignment." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Blackwood's expression froze, his eyes widening slightly as he stared at the badge. Officer Parker had straightened completely now, his professional instincts kicking in. He moved a step closer, examining the badge from where he stood. May I approach to verify the credentials, Your Honor? He asked, his tone notably more respectful than it had been moments before. The judge seemed momentarily at a loss for words. After a pause that stretched just a bit too long, he nodded. Yes, of course. Officer Parker walked over to Kira, who handed him her credentials. He examined them carefully, turning the badge over in his hands and studying the ID card with its security features. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this unexpected turn of events. The routine traffic court session had suddenly become much more interesting. After a thorough inspection, Officer Parker handed the credentials back to Kira with a nod of acknowledgement. These appear to be genuine, Your Honor. He turned to face the bench. United States Secret Service credentials with proper identification number and current issue date. Judge Blackwood's face had changed color slightly. The confident, slightly dismissive expression was gone, replaced by something harder to read. Surprise mixed with something else. Discomfort, perhaps. I see, he said finally, his voice having lost some of its previous authority. Agent Washington, why didn't you present these credentials at the beginning of this proceeding? Kira returned the badge case to her inner pocket before answering. Your Honor, I don't make a habit of flashing my federal credentials for minor civilian matters. I believe the official letter from my supervisor would be sufficient verification of my whereabouts on the day in question. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I'm not trying to use my position to receive special treatment. I'm simply trying to establish that I was physically elsewhere when this violation allegedly occurred, making it impossible for me to have committed it. The judge shuffled some papers on his bench, clearly buying time to collect himself. The dynamic in the courtroom had shifted completely. Where moments before he had been dismissive and controlling, now he seemed unsure of how to proceed. Well, he said finally, this does present a different perspective on the matter. He glanced at Officer Parker. Officer, given this new information, do you wish to reconsider the citation? Officer Parker nodded slightly. Your Honor, if Agent Washington was on protective detail at the time of the violation, as her credentials and documentation suggest, then there may indeed have been an error in identification. The partial plate capture could potentially match another vehicle. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat. Yes, that seems possible. He looked back at Kira, his expression now carefully neutral. Agent Washington, you mentioned you have documentation proving your location on August 12th? Yes, Your Honor, Kira replied, keeping her tone professional despite the urge to point out she'd been trying to show him that documentation for the past 10 minutes. I have my official assignment schedule signed by my supervisor, as well as location data from my phone confirming I was at the downtown conference center at the time of the alleged violation. I see. And you're certain your vehicle wasn't being used by anyone else at that time? Yes, Your Honor. My car was parked in the secure lot at headquarters, which requires keycard access to enter and exit. There would be records of that as well, which I can obtain if necessary. The judge seemed to be weighing his options. The gallery remained silent, everyone watching to see how he would handle this unexpected turn. Finally, he spoke. In light of this new evidence in Agent Washington's credentials, I believe a more thorough review of this case is warranted. He turned to the court clerk. Ms. Hernandez, please note that this case is being continued pending further investigation into the vehicle identification. The clerk nodded, typing rapidly on her keyboard. Judge Blackwood looked back at Kira. Agent Washington, the court apologizes for any misunderstanding. We will review the evidence more carefully and contact you with our findings. His tone had transformed completely, from dismissive to almost deferential. The change wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Kira maintained her professional demeanor. Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the court's reconsideration. She gathered her folder of documentation, aware that every eye in the room was on her. As she turned to leave, Judge Blackwood spoke again. Agent Washington. She paused, looking back at him. The court. I would like to express appreciation for your service. The words seemed to come with difficulty. The Secret Service performs vital functions for our nation's security. Kira nodded slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. As she walked back through the gallery toward the exit, She could feel the stares of the other defendants and spectators. A path seemed to clear for her automatically. Near the door, a young woman whispered to her companion, not quite quietly enough, "Did you see his face when she showed that badge? Priceless." In the hallway outside the courtroom, Kira allowed herself a deep breath. She hadn't wanted to use her credentials that way. In her 8 years with the service, she had rarely found it necessary to identify herself as an agent in civilian settings. But Judge Blackwood had left her no choice. She was about to head for the exit when Officer Parker emerged from the courtroom and approached her. "Agent Washington," he said, his tone respectful. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Kira nodded, curious about what he wanted. "I wanted to apologize," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "That situation in there, it wasn't handled well." "You were just doing your job, officer," Kira replied diplomatically. He shook his head. "The camera at that intersection has been problematic. We've had several disputed citations recently. The angle doesn't always capture the full plate clearly, and the recognition software fills in the blanks." He hesitated. Sometimes incorrectly, it seems. This was interesting information. Information that would have been helpful earlier. "I see. I'll make sure this gets clear. Ed up properly," he added. "No need for you to come back in. We can dismiss the citation based on the evidence you've provided." "I'd appreciate that." "Thank you." Officer Parker seemed to want to say something else but was hesitating. Finally, he spoke again, his voice even lower. "Judge Blackwood, he has a certain way of running his courtroom. Some people say he can be tough on certain defendants." The implication hung in the air between them. Kira simply nodded, not wanting to put the officer in an awkward position by asking him to elaborate on criticism of a judge. "Anyway," he continued, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, and thank you for your service. My brother-in-law worked protection detail for Treasury before the reorganization. Tough job." "It has its moments," Kira acknowledged. "Thanks for your understanding, officer." They shook hands, and Officer Parker returned to the courtroom. Kira continued down the hallway, her mind already shifting to the rest of her day. She would need to call her supervisor and let him know what had happened. There would be paperwork. There was always paperwork when you had to identify yourself officially. As she stepped out of the courthouse into the late morning sunshine, her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "How'd it go? Judge see reason?" Kira smiled slightly as she typed her reply. "You could say that. Tell you about it later." She slipped her phone back into her pocket and headed for her car. The encounter with Judge Blackwood kept replaying in her mind. His dismissive attitude, his refusal to even look at her evidence, the way his entire demeanor had changed when he saw her badge. It wasn't the first time she'd experienced something like this. As a black woman in law enforcement, Kira had faced her share of assumptions and biases over the years. Usually she handled them with professionalism and restraint, letting her work speak for itself rather than making an issue of every slight. But sometimes, like today, the unfairness of it all hit harder. Judge Blackwood hadn't just doubted her story, he had refused to even consider her evidence until forced to do so. He had spoken to her with condescension, assuming she was lying even though she had come prepared with documentation. Would he have treated a white man in a suit the same way? Someone who looked more like his idea of a federal agent? Kira had her doubts. As she drove away from the courthouse, she tried to put the incident behind her. She had a busy week ahead. The senator's protection detail started tomorrow, and she needed to review the security protocols tonight. This traffic court business had already taken up too much of her time and mental energy, but she couldn't help wondering about the other people who appeared before Judge Blackwood, people who didn't have federal badges to make him suddenly treat them with respect, people whose stories were dismissed without consideration, whose evidence was ignored, who left that courtroom feeling powerless and unheard. Maybe there was something she could do about that. Not today, but someday. For now, she had a job to do, protecting people who needed protection. And she was very good at her job, regardless of what judges like Harold Blackwood might initially assume when they looked at her. Kira adjusted her rearview mirror and focused on the road ahead. The morning's confrontation was over, but she had a feeling its ripple effects might continue for some time to come. And maybe, just maybe, Judge Blackwood would think twice before making assumptions about the next person who stood before his bench. The courtroom air felt heavier by the minute. Kira stood perfectly still, her posture a result of years of training and discipline. Judge Blackwood continued his lecture, his voice rising slightly as he warmed to his theme. "People come into my courtroom every day with excuses," he said, gesturing broadly. "Everyone has a story. Everyone has a reason why the rules shouldn't apply to them." He looked down at Kira, his expression a mixture of impatience and something else, something that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "But the law applies equally to everyone, Ms. Washington. That's the foundation of our justice system. No one gets special treatment just because they claim to have an important job." The emphasis he placed on the word claim was unmistakable. He didn't believe her. Despite the official letterhead, despite the documentation, despite everything she had presented, he had decided she was lying. Around her, the courtroom had grown unusually quiet. The other waiting defendants, the court officers, even the clerk seemed to be watching the exchange with heightened interest. This wasn't the usual traffic court procedure anymore. "Your Honor," Kira began, keeping her voice level, "I understand and respect the principle that the law applies equally to everyone. That's precisely why I'm here, to correct a mistake. I was not at that intersection on the date in question, and my car wasn't there either." Judge Blackwood's mouth tightened. "Ms. Washington, I've heard enough." "I don't think you have, Your Honor," Kira interrupted, something she would normally never do, but this situation had pushed her beyond her usual patience. "You've heard my explanation, but you haven't actually considered it. You decided I was lying before you even looked at my evidence." A murmur ran through the gallery. Interrupting Judge Blackwood was not something people did lightly. His face darkened. "Ms. Washington, you are dangerously close to contempt of court. I suggest you moderate your tone and accept the court's decision." Kira took a deep breath. She had faced down would-be assassins, coordinated evacuations during bomb threats, and protected some of the most powerful people in the world. She wasn't going to be intimidated by a traffic court judge with an attitude problem. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe there's something you need to see." Judge Blackwood's expression suggested he was about to deliver a blistering response, but something in Kira's tone, calm, confident, unwavering, made him pause. "What exactly do you think I need to see that will change the facts presented by Officer Parker?" he asked, gesturing toward the police officer who stood nearby. "This, Your Honor." With slow, deliberate movements trained into her through years of service, Kira reached into her blazer's inner pocket. She was acutely aware of the court security officer taking a half-step forward, hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. She made sure her movements remained slow and visible to everyone. From her pocket, she withdrew a small leather case about the size of a wallet, but slightly thicker. She held it in her hand for a moment, not yet opening it. "Your Honor, I had hoped to resolve this matter without having to do this. I don't like to use my position in situations like this, but you've left me no choice." She flipped open the case, revealing the gleaming gold badge of the United States Secret Service and her official identification card with her photo, name, and credentials clearly visible. "I am Agent Kira Washington of the United States Secret Service, currently assigned to the Protective Intelligence Division. On August 12th, I was on protective detail for a visiting foreign dignitary at the downtown conference center, as stated in the documentation I provided." She held the badge and ID up so that Judge Blackwood could clearly see them, then angled it slightly so Officer Parker could verify them as well. The courtroom went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Judge Blackwood stared at the badge, his expression freezing as the implications sank in. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again without saying anything. Officer Parker moved forward, professional interest, overriding the usual courtroom protocol. "May I see those credentials, please?" he asked, his tone notably more respectful than it had been moments before. Kira handed him the badge case, and he examined it carefully, turning it over in his hands and scrutinizing the security features on the ID card. After a moment, he nodded and returned it to her. "These appear to be genuine, Your Honor," he said, turning to face the judge. Judge Blackwood's face had gone through a remarkable transformation. The dismissive confidence was gone, replaced by a look of shock and, was that fear? His complexion had paled noticeably, and he seemed to be struggling to find words. I see, he finally managed, his voice having lost its previous authority. Agent Washington, why didn't you present these credentials from the beginning? Kira returned the badge to her pocket before answering. Your Honor, I don't make a habit of using my federal credentials to address civilian matters when standard documentation should suffice. The letter from my supervisor on official letterhead should have been adequate proof of my whereabouts on the day in question. She paused, then added pointedly, had you actually read it? Another murmur rippled through the courtroom. Someone, in the back row, whispered, "Oh snap," just loudly enough to be heard. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain his composure and control of the situation. Yes, well, this does put things in a different light. He shuffled the papers on his bench, apparently searching for something to do with his hands. Officer Parker, given this new information, do you wish to reconsider the citation? The officer nodded immediately. Yes, Your Honor. If Agent Washington was on protective detail at the time, as her credentials indicate, then there was clearly an error in the vehicle identification. The partial plate capture must have matched another similar vehicle. Judge Blackwood nodded, perhaps a bit too eagerly. Yes, that seems the most likely explanation. He looked back at Kira, his entire demeanor transformed. Where before he had been dismissive and almost hostile, now he was practically deferential. Agent Washington, please accept the court's apologies for this misunderstanding. The citation will be dismissed immediately, of course. He turned to the clerk. Ms. Rodriguez, please note in the record that case number 2023 TR 4587 is dismissed due to mistaken identity of the vehicle. The clerk nodded, typing quickly on her keyboard. Furthermore, Judge Blackwood continued, let the record show that the court extends its appreciation to Agent Washington for her service to our country. The sudden change in his attitude was so dramatic that several people in the gallery exchanged knowing glances. It wasn't lost on anyone that this appreciation came only after discovering her position, not when she was just another defendant in his courtroom. Thank you, Your Honor, Kira replied, keeping her tone professional despite the urge to point out his hypocrisy. Is there anything else the court requires from me today? No, Judge Blackwood said quickly. You're free to go. Again, we apologize for taking up your valuable time with this matter. Kira gathered her documents and turned to leave. As she walked back through the gallery, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room following her. Near the door, a young woman whispered to her companion, "Did you see his face? Thought he was going to pass out." In the hallway outside, Kira allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. She hadn't wanted to use her credentials that way. In her years with the service, she had made it a point not to leverage her position for personal advantage. But Judge Blackwood had left her no choice. She was about to head for the exit when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Officer Parker approaching. Agent Washington, he called, catching up to her. A moment, please. Kira stopped, curious about what he wanted. I wanted to apologize personally, he said, lowering his voice. That situation, it wasn't handled well. You were just doing your job, officer, Kira replied diplomatically. He shook his head. The camera at that intersection has been problematic. We've had several disputed citations from it recently. The angle doesn't always capture the full plate clearly, and the recognition software fills in the gaps. He paused. Sometimes incorrectly, it seems. I see. I'll make sure this gets properly cleared from the system, he added. You won't have any record of this citation. I appreciate that, thank you. Officer Parker seemed to hesitate, then spoke again, his voice even lower. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but Judge Blackwood has a reputation. Some officers don't like having their cases in his court because of how he treats certain defendants. The implication was clear, and Kira simply nodded, not wanting to put the officer in an awkward position by asking him to elaborate. Anyway, He continued. I'm sorry about the mix-up and thank you for your service. My cousin worked protection detail for Treasury before the reorganization. Tough job. It has its moments, Kira acknowledged. Thanks for your understanding. Officer. They shook hands and Kira continued toward the exit. As she pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the sunshine, her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. How'd it go? Judge see reason? Kira smiled slightly as she typed her reply. You could say that. I'll tell you over dinner. Slipping her phone back into her pocket, she walked down the courthouse steps, replaying the encounter in her mind. Judge Blackwood's dismissive attitude, his refusal to even consider her evidence, the way his entire demeanor changed when he saw her badge. It wasn't the first time she'd experienced something like this. As a black woman in law enforcement, Kira had faced her share of assumptions and biases. Usually, she handled them with professionalism and restraint, focusing on doing her job rather than calling out every slight. But sometimes, like today, the unfairness of it hit harder. Judge Blackwood hadn't just doubted her. He had refused to even consider her evidence until forced to do so. He had spoken to her with condescension, assuming she was lying without any real justification. Would he have treated a white man in a suit the same way? Someone who matched his mental image of what a federal agent should look like? Kira had her doubts. As she reached her car, she took a moment to collect herself before getting in. The confrontation with Judge Blackwood had been resolved in her favor, but it left a bitter taste. Not because of how she had been treated, she was used to that, but because of what it revealed about the system. How many other people stood before Judge Blackwood each day without a federal badge to make him suddenly treat them with respect? People whose stories were dismissed without consideration, whose evidence was ignored, who left that courtroom feeling powerless and unheard. That thought bothered her more than the personal affront. Her job was to protect people. That's what had drawn her to the Secret Service in the first place. But protection wasn't just about physical security. Sometimes it was about justice, about fairness, about making sure everyone was treated with dignity, regardless of what they looked like or what assumptions others made about them. As she started her car and pulled away from the courthouse, Kira made a mental note to speak with her supervisor about what had happened. Not to complain about her treatment, but to discuss whether there might be a pattern of behavior in Judge Blackwood's courtroom that deserved closer attention. For now, though, she needed to focus on her upcoming assignment. The senator's protection detail started tomorrow, and she had preparations to make. This traffic court business had already taken up too much of her time and mental energy. Still, as she drove through the city streets toward headquarters, Kira couldn't help thinking that maybe this incident had happened for a reason. Maybe she had been in that courtroom today not just to clear her own name, but to witness something that needed to be addressed. And if there was one thing Kira Washington was good at, it was addressing problems head-on. Whether they came in the form of security threats or judges who needed to be reminded that justice was supposed to be blind. She adjusted her rearview mirror and focused on the road ahead. The morning's confrontation was over, but she had a feeling its effects might continue for some time to come. And maybe, just maybe, Judge Harold Blackwood would think twice before making assumptions about the next person who stood before his bench. The morning after her court appearance, Kira arrived at the Secret Service field office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, with most agents not due in for another hour. She liked these peaceful moments before the day officially began, time to think, to prepare, to center herself. She had just settled at her desk with a cup of coffee when she heard a familiar voice. "Washington, you're in early." Agent Reynolds, her supervisor, stood in the doorway of her office. Tall and lean with salt and pepper hair, he had the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades in protection work. "Morning, sir," Kira replied. "Just getting organized for the senator's detail today." Reynolds nodded, then stepped into her office and closed the door behind him. That was unusual, and a clear sign that this wasn't just a casual check-in. "I got an interesting call yesterday afternoon," he said, sitting down in the chair across from her desk. "From the district attorney's office." Kira set down her coffee mug. "About my traffic court appearance?" "Yes. Apparently there was some kind of incident with Judge Blackwood." His expression gave nothing away. Care to fill me in? Kira took a breath, organizing her thoughts. She gave him a concise account of what had happened. The dismissive treatment, the refusal to look at her evidence, and finally her decision to show her credentials. I didn't want to use my position that way, she finished. But he wasn't giving me any other option. Reynolds listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Did I overstep, sir? Kira finally asked. Reynolds shook his head slowly. No. From what you've described and from what the DA's office told me, you handled yourself professionally under difficult circumstances. He leaned forward slightly. But that's not what concerns me, Washington. What concerns me is why this happened in the first place. Sir, Judge Blackwood has been on the bench for nearly 30 years. He's not known for being particularly pleasant, but he's never been formally reprimanded for bias or misconduct. Reynolds paused. However, there have been whispers, complaints that never quite became official, patterns that were noticed but never documented. Kira nodded, understanding where this was going. And you think my experience might be part of that pattern? I do. The DA who called me, Lisa Chen, she's been watching Blackwood for a while. Your case caught her attention because it was so blatant, so clear-cut. Reynolds stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that was coming to life in the early morning light. The judiciary is supposed to be impartial, he said almost to himself. The foundation of our legal system depends on it. When a judge shows bias, whether it's racial, gender-based, or anything else, it undermines everything we're supposed to stand for. He turned back to face Kira. DA Chen would like to speak with you if you're willing. She's putting together a review of Judge Blackwood's pattern of behavior in court. Kira considered this. As a federal agent, she tried to stay out of local politics and judicial matters unless they directly impacted her work. But this wasn't about politics. It was about justice. I'll speak with her, she decided. What happened to me wasn't right. And if it is happening to others who don't have a badge to make the judge suddenly pay attention, that's even worse. Reynolds nodded, a small smile touching his lips. I thought you might say that. He moved back to the chair and sat down again. But let's be clear about something, Washington. This is delicate. Judge Blackwood has friends in high places. The last thing we need is for this to look like the federal government is targeting a local judge. I understand, sir. I'll keep it professional and stick to the facts. Good. Reynolds stood up. DA Chen will contact you directly to set up a meeting. For now, focus on today's assignment. The senator's arriving at 11, and I want everything running smoothly. Yes, sir. As Reynolds reached the door, he paused and looked back at her. Washington? Sir? For what it's worth, I'm proud of how you handled yourself yesterday. Standing up to authority when it's abusing its power, that takes courage. Even with a badge. After he left, Kira sat quietly for a moment, surprised by the unexpected praise. Reynolds wasn't known for giving compliments freely. The rest of the day passed in the focused rhythm of protection work. The senator's schedule included 3 public appearances and a private fundraising dinner. By the time Kira finished her shift and handed over to the night team, it was past 9 in the evening. She was just reaching her car in the parking garage when her phone rang. The display showed a number she didn't recognize. Agent Washington, she answered. Agent Washington, this is District Attorney Lisa Chen. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, ma'am. Agent Reynolds mentioned you might be in touch. Yes, I'd like to meet with you about your experience with Judge Blackwood. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I can make myself available, yes. They arranged to meet at the DA's office at 3 the following day. As Kira drove home, she found herself thinking about what this might lead to. One incident, even one, as clear as hers, wouldn't be enough to trigger any official action against a judge. But if it was part of a pattern, documented over time. The next afternoon, Kira arrived at the district attorney's office in the county building, a modern glass and steel structure that contrasted sharply with the classical courthouse where she had faced Judge Blackwood. Lisa Chen was younger than Kira had expected, probably in her early 40s, with a direct gaze and a no-nonsense handshake. "Thank you for coming, Agent Washington," she said, leading Kira into a conference room rather than her personal office. "I've asked a few colleagues to join us, if that's all right with you." Inside the conference room, 3 people were already seated at the table. Chen introduced them: an assistant DA specializing in civil rights cases, a data analyst from the DA's office, and a representative from the state's Judicial Conduct Commission. The presence of the last person told Kira that this was more serious than she had realized. For the next hour, Kira recounted her experience in Judge Blackwood's courtroom in detail, answering specific questions about his language, tone, and behavior. The others took notes, occasionally exchanging glances. When she finished, the representative from the Judicial Conduct Commission, a grave-looking woman named Patricia Alvarez, spoke for the first time. "Agent Washington, would you say that Judge Blackwood's attitude changed completely after you revealed your credentials?" "Yes, without question, it was like flipping a switch. And before that moment, despite your professional appearance and the official documentation you presented, he was dismissive and refused to properly consider your evidence?" "That's correct." Alvarez nodded, making another note. "Thank you for your candor." DA Chen leaned forward. "Agent Washington, what you've described is consistent with other reports we've received about Judge Blackwood. Unfortunately, most people who experience this kind of treatment don't have the standing or resources to make formal complaints, or a federal badge to make him suddenly pay attention," Kira added quietly. "Exactly." Chen looked at her colleagues, then back at Kira. "We believe there's a pattern of biased behavior that needs to be addressed. Your testimony is particularly valuable because of your credibility as a federal agent, and because the incident was witnessed by a courtroom full of people, including Officer Parker, who has already provided his own statement." This surprised Kira. "Officer Parker came forward?" "Yes, voluntarily. He was quite disturbed by what he witnessed." The data analyst, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We've been reviewing Judge Blackwood's cases for the past 3 years. The statistics are troubling. Defendants of color consistently receive harsher treatment, longer speaking restrictions, and fewer opportunities to present evidence than white defendants appearing before him on similar charges. The numbers alone aren't enough for action," Chen explained, "but combined with specific incidents like yours documented by credible witnesses, they create a compelling case." "What happens now?" Kira asked. Alvarez answered. "The commission will conduct a formal review. If the evidence supports it, Judge Blackwood could face anything from mandatory sensitivity training to removal from the bench, depending on the severity and pattern of the misconduct. In the meantime," Chen added, "the DA's office is reviewing cases where defendants may have been treated unfairly in his court. We can't overturn traffic citations, but for more serious cases where bias may have affected the outcome, we have options." As the meeting concluded, Chen walked Kira to the elevator. "Thank you again for coming forward, Agent Washington. I know federal agents typically try to stay out of local judicial matters." "This isn't about politics," Kira replied. "It's about ensuring everyone gets fair treatment, regardless of what they look like or what assumptions people make about them." Chen smiled. "Exactly. That's what the system is supposed to guarantee, even if it doesn't always deliver." As the elevator doors opened, she added, "We'll be in touch about any further developments. And Agent Washington, what you did matters, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who walks into that courtroom." A week passed, then 2. Kira was busy with her regular duties and had almost put the Blackwood incident behind her when she received an official letter from the Judicial Conduct Commission, thanking her for her testimony and informing her that a formal investigation had been opened. 3 days later, she got a text from Diane. "Have you seen this?" followed by a link to a local news article. The headline read, "County Judge Faces Ethics Review Amid Bias Allegations." The article detailed how Judge Harold Blackwood had been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties, pending an investigation into allegations of biased treatment in his courtroom. Later that afternoon, Kira's phone rang. It was Officer Parker. Agent Washington, I thought you might want to know. They're implementing new procedures for the traffic cameras at problem intersections. Better verification requirements, manual review of partial plate captures before citations are issued. That's good news, Kira replied. Should prevent situations like mine. That's the idea. And it's happening because of what went down in Blackwood's court that day. He paused. Word is he's being sent to some kind of intensive bias training program, assuming he keeps his job at all. After they hung up, Kira sat at her desk, thinking about the ripple effects of that confrontation in the courtroom. One incident, one moment of standing her ground, had potentially sparked changes that would affect countless others. That evening, she met Diane for dinner at their favorite restaurant. As they settled into their usual booth, Diane raised her water glass and a mock toast to bringing down corrupt judges, she said with a grin. Kira shook her head, smiling. That's not what happened, and you know it. The system worked the way it's supposed to, eventually. One person spoke up, others added their voices, and the authorities took appropriate action. After you flashed your badge and scared the hell out of him, Diane pointed out. Well, that part was satisfying, I'll admit. They both laughed, but then Kira grew more serious. The thing is, I keep thinking about all the people who stood in that courtroom before me. People who didn't have badges or connections or the confidence to challenge him. People who just accepted his dismissive treatment because they didn't see any other option. Diane nodded, understanding. You made a difference for them too, you know. Even if they never hear about it. Maybe, Kira acknowledged. But there are other Judge Blackwoods out there. The work isn't done. It never is, Diane agreed. But tonight let's celebrate one small victory for justice. And the look on his face when you pulled out that badge. Kira smiled, remembering. That part was pretty satisfying. 2 weeks later, Kira received an unexpected visitor at the Secret Service field office. The receptionist called up to her desk. Agent Washington, there's a Ms. Alvarez here to see you. From the Judicial Conduct Commission. Curious, Kira went down to the lobby, where Patricia Alvarez was waiting. Agent Washington, thank you for seeing me without an appointment, Alvarez said as they shook hands. I wanted to update you personally on our investigation. They sat in a small meeting room off the lobby. Judge Blackwood has agreed to undergo comprehensive bias training and cultural sensitivity education. Alvarez began. He'll remain on administrative duties for at least 6 months, and his return to the bench will be conditional on satisfactory completion of the program and ongoing monitoring. That seems fair, Kira commented. Additionally, all of his cases, as from the past 5 years, are being reviewed for evidence of systematic bias. Where problems are found, remedies will be implemented. Alvarez paused. He also wanted me to give you this. She handed Kira an envelope. Inside was a formal letter of apology from Judge Harold Blackwood. The language was stiff and somewhat formal, but it acknowledged his inappropriate behavior and promised to do better in the future. Was this required? Kira asked, gesturing to the letter. No, Alvarez replied. That was his own initiative. I believe your encounter genuinely affected him. After Alvarez left, Kira returned to her desk, thinking about the letter. Was it sincere, or just an attempt to improve his position with the commission? She couldn't know for sure, but the fact that he had written it at all suggested at least the possibility of change. The following Monday, Kira was preparing for a new assignment when Agent Reynolds stopped by her office. Washington, got a minute? Of course, sir, he closed the door behind him. I've been asked to pass along a message from upstairs. The director has taken note of how you handled the Blackwood situation. Kira felt a momentary flutter of concern. Had she overstepped after all? It seems, Reynolds continued, that your actions have been viewed as an example of upholding our core values: integrity, honor, and a commitment to justice, even when off duty. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a brief note from the director himself commending her professionalism and character. Thank you, sir, Kira said, genuinely surprised by the recognition. Reynolds nodded. You did good, Washington. Sometimes, making a difference isn't about grand gestures or headlines. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground when it matters. As he turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and the senator specifically requested you for his detail next month when he returns to town. Said he'd heard good things about you." After Reynolds left, Kira sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened since that day in traffic court. What had started as a simple case of mistaken identity had turned into something much more significant, not just for her, but for the community, for the justice system, and perhaps even for Judge Blackwood himself. She placed the director's note in her desk drawer and turned her attention back to her work. There were people to protect, duties to fulfill, and a job to do. But she did so with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes standing up for what's right makes a difference that extends far beyond one person or one moment, and that was worth more than any badge.